if you wait for his promises to make American lives better, unravel, because he won't be able to bring down inflation. He won't be able to deal with the government debt. Okay, in 2, 3 years, people may become disenchanted, but you may not have the luxury of time.
The president, Joe Biden, has told America to lower the political heat, speaking for the first time that Donald Trump was confirmed as his successor. He's promised a smooth transition.
Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory, and I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve.
Well, Biden is bracing, I think, for the next 73 days in office before he hands over to a man that he had said was fundamentally unfit for office. Well, that man, Donald Trump, is preparing, making key White House appointments and policy plans. A name that you're going to get familiar with is Susan, or Susie Wiles. She was one of Trump's campaign advisors. She is now going to be chief of staff. And in terms of Trump's priorities, Donald Trump wants to make a quick start of cutting taxes and protecting US business from foreign competition in his first 100 days. Here to help us steer through all of this, Scott Lucas, the Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin, is here. Scott, good morning.
Good morning to you, Rosie.
And what has Trump told us his priorities are?
Trump's told you his priorities are to seek vengeance. I mean, if we're going to get real here, be realistic about what happens in January, you start with Trump's statements that from day one of being in the White House, he acts like a dictator. Now, he tied that at that point to saying that he would immediately unleash the U.S. oil industry by allowing fracking, drill, baby, drill, and also would have these sweeping measures on the border. But he has also said, beyond, those supposed policies, he will seek retribution against his enemies, and he has said he will consider using the military against enemies within. One of his immediate steps will be to try to take control of certain agencies, to neuter them, especially the Justice Department, because he wants to get out of his legal bind with the multiple felony cases that follow the case where he has already been convicted on 34 counts, felony counts. He and his inner circle, and we know this from Project 2025, which Trump has authored, will seek to take control of other agencies to bend them to Trump's wills. That includes the Treasury, it includes State Department, it includes the military. It even might include the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be independent of government. Now, what you tease beyond that is that I do think the concrete policy you will see rolled out is a proposed cut in corporation tax. But there's two things about that. First of all, that cut in corporation tax, Trump says, will not be allowed for U.S. businesses that operate abroad. And secondly, how are you going to fund this? And Trump has no policies in terms of funding said tax cuts. Indeed, economists estimate that he'll add 15 trillion, that's trillion with a T, dollars to an already rapidly growing U.S. federal government debt.
Yeah. One of the challenges with Donald Trump, and I think the Labour Party here in the UK are sort of slightly resting on this, is that Donald Trump makes a lot of claims about things he's going to do, and then some of those things don't happen. I mean, Pat McFadden described it as Trump said a lot of fiery things during his election campaign. He said that he's got no choice but to carry out a plan to deport people living illegally in the US en masse. Previously he said he was going to build a wall. That didn't happen. How much, Scott, do you think of what we've heard from Donald Trump in terms of his policy priorities were sort of blustered to help win the election rather than sort of serious, credible policies?
Well, I think let's compare this with the first term and in terms of what might happen, where we might go with this. Donald Trump did carry out the cut in taxes. It's one of the few policies he pushed through Congress in December of 2017. But in terms of the broader approach to the economy, contrary to the Trumpist claim, he didn't bring stability. He, in fact, undermined elements of the U.S. economy, shutting down government on repeated occasions. And of course, that economy began to unravel during the pandemic when unemployment reached an all-time high in the U.S. after 1945 at around 15%. The problem, I think, with Pat McFadden's statement, and he's a seasoned politician, is all right, if you wait 2-3 years for Trump not to deliver on his promises, not to deliver on border security, something that he undermined only a year ago by scrapping bipartisan legislation for it. If you wait for his promises to make American lives better unravel because he won't be able to bring down inflation. He won't be able to deal with the government debt. Okay, in 2, 3 years, people may become disenchanted, but you may not have the luxury of time. And again, another quick reminder, this is how quickly things can unravel. Within the first week in office in 2017, Donald Trump and his advisors tried to ban Muslims from getting into the United States, slapping that on 6 countries, causing chaos at U.S. airports and across the country. Later in the year, Donald Trump and his advisors tried to deport people. They weren't successful in deporting millions, but while they tried to implement that, it caused chaos. It ripped the country apart. And indeed, you may remember that Donald Trump and his advisors would separate children from their families, putting parents in detention as part of that supposed border policy. And in his language, beyond his policies, Donald Trump will cause damage. And I don't think you can wait 2, 3 years and say, well, this too shall pass, folks. This too shall pass, possibly
I
not
think
like a slow erosion of America, but a very serious devastation.
that millions of Americans believe that Donald Trump will steer America better than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris could have done, which is why we now have the result that we do. We heard from Joe Biden yesterday saying this is a defeat, but we're not defeated. The fight goes on. Presumably, though, and the case you've just laid out there, Scott, the Americans who voted for Donald Trump, this gives the Democrats a serious period of soul searching to work out what their purpose is and who they actually represent.
And you have to acknowledge that Donald Trump and his campaign exploited a sense of anger, fear, resentment of many Americans, a sense that has been there since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009, and a sense that continued with the shocks after coming out of COVID. When you had that spike in inflation in 2022, that even though inflation has come down since then, people are feeling the effects of it. You have to try to figure out how to connect with people in terms of explaining what you're going to do to make lives better. You have to figure out why, when Democrats did try to do that during the Harris campaign, because they did have economic policies, they did have social policies, that they didn't make those connections in what is a damaged American media environment. And you have to establish why Democrats, it wasn't a case that Donald Trump's vote surged in this election. His vote actually dropped by about 1.5 million people. What happened here is, of course, is that the Democratic vote collapsed by about 13.5 million. So why didn't people turn out for the Democrats? Why did Donald Trump increase his vote amongst young women, even as he threatens their reproductive rights? You've got to deal with those issues, and you've got to do it constructively. You cannot sink to Trump's level, which is simply slash and burn. You can't do it for the sake of one person's ego. You have to do it for the good of Americans, even if they didn't vote for you.
Scott, thank you so much. Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin. And as we've been speaking, Donald Trump has been appointing those first members of his team. On Times Radio Breakfast, they'll assess who they are, what it means about Donald Trump's priorities. Up next, though, we're going to be looking at his relationship with President Putin, as Putin has said publicly he'd hold talks with Trump.